Clickbait title activate! No, we're not going there. I've already said publicly plenty of times I enjoy D&D 5e, even if I've made the choice not to invest in the game, and we're going to talk about why on this video of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller foolish enough to get involved in an edition war. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of RPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder, and in particular today, Dungeons and Dragons. This is a special video. We are celebrating a milestone for this channel. Last month, this channel passed 1,000 subscribers, and I actually put out a poll to my community and asked you all what topic you would be interested in me covering as sort of a bonus video for this channel. And one of the conversations that I've had several times in the comments on several of my videos surrounds Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I am primarily a Pathfinder 2e content creator. I also do some stuff for Starfinder. Most of what I talk about on this channel is gaming products that have been designed by Paizo. And as a result, from time to time, I will get into conversations with people on the subject of Dungeons & Dragons, especially Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Let's just be honest, when D&D and Pathfinder are two of the biggest names in the field, it is natural that people are going to compare the two. It is natural that people are going to have a favorite between the two. And very quickly and very easily, you can get into what is commonly known as edition wars over what is a person's favorite version of fantasy storytelling. Now, I have very obviously fallen on the side of Pathfinder. I enjoyed Pathfinder 1e more than I did D&D 5e, and I definitely enjoyed Pathfinder 2e far more than I enjoyed D&D 5e. And I've had many people kind of ask me about how I came to this conclusion. And I will be honest, I've been a little bit afraid to talk about this topic because, well, it's the internet and they call it edition wars for a reason. So, let me just be clear up front. I actually like D&D 5e. I've played in several D&D 5e campaigns. I think that D&D 5e is a very solid game, and honestly, I do like the system. And just so we're really clear, I think you can use systems like D&D 5e to tell fantastic stories. The show Critical Role is a very good example of just how deep and engaging the storytelling can be in and around D&D 5e. Overall, I like the game. I may have picked something else, but I don't actually dislike Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But I do realize in talking about why I went the direction I did in my gaming purchases that I run the risk of stepping on some toes, making people angry. But I'm going to go ahead and say this. You all are a fantastic community. I have been truly blessed by the community we have been building here around this channel, and I have seen some incredible conversations take place. So, you know what? Let's take a shot at this conversation. I trust you all to jump in and be a part of the conversation and contribute in a positive manner to this discussion. And I do think that this is an interesting discussion in terms of RPG design. While we won't deep dive this entire conversation, Pathfinder versus Dungeons & Dragons is a really good, I guess you could say, comparison of the question of role playing versus role playing, ROLE versus ROLL, and what impact mechanics has on the storytelling experience in a role playing game. So let me just go ahead and say I welcome you all to be a part of the conversation. I trust you all to contribute well to these discussions, and truthfully, conversations like this are a fantastic opportunity to arrive at a better understanding of what good game design actually looks like. So if you agree with my points today, definitely let me know in the comments, and if you disagree with my points, join in the conversation as well. All of this helps us build better stories and a better gaming community. Let's get started. So before I dive into talking about why Dungeons and Dragons was ultimately a product that I chose not to invest in, I want to do a little story time first. I want to share with you one of my favorite experiences ever as a storyteller. Several years ago, back in the Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 era, there was a really just brutal ice storm that hit the community that I was living in. It was one of those storms that you remember over the course of your life. It was one of those storms that just kind of shut down our entire community for close to 3 weeks, actually. Power was knocked out all over the place, and people were forced to, several families would gather into one home together, and I actually ended up in a situation where me and several of my friends were camping out in an insurance office because it was one of the few places that actually had power where we could, gather together and stay warm. And during that time where, there's no internet and there's no satellite and, there's just really nothing to do except just try to endure this storm, to help my friends pass the time, I decided to run a game. But the thing was, in leaving my apartment and going over to this insurance building, I didn't have a chance to take a lot of stuff with me. It was a travel light, travel quick kind of situation. And so all I really had was just a small collection of dice and some note cards. So I came up with a game system loosely based off Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 that I called D20 Simple. And it was a fantasy role-playing rule set that was so simple that you could literally write all of your character information on the front of a single note card. And during that span of 3 weeks, me and my friends played just this simple but amazing role-playing game. We had so much fun telling stories and rolling dice and just pushing back against this oppressive weather phenomenon. It is hard to describe how amazing of a storytelling experience I had using just some dice and some note cards. It was phenomenal. To this day, my D20 Simple rules still rank as one of the best role-playing experiences I have ever had. It is a fantastic example of how role-playing does not have to hinge on heavy mechanics in order to tell a fantastic story. So now that I've established that mechanics are not necessary to tell a good story, let's talk about the mechanics of D&D 5e and why ultimately I didn't invest in the system. So in reality, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition made a mechanical choice that ultimately caused me to decide I didn't want to invest in the game. And I'm going to call this mechanical choice the worst best mechanical design I've seen in an RPG. Or, I guess to be a little more clear about the point I'm making, in D&D 5e, Wizards of the Coast decided to invest very heavily in what is a very strong mechanic, but they over-invested in the mechanic to the point that it actually interferes with my enjoyment of the game. And I know this is going to be controversial. I'm expecting some fun comments, but I don't like how D&D 5e uses the advantage-disadvantage system. Advantage and disadvantage, I will say this, is a very strong system for one particular reason, and that is ease of understanding. If you want a mechanic that is easy to understand and easy to apply for players, advantage and disadvantage is fantastic. Is it a situation that gives your character an advantage? Roll 2 dice, take the best result. Is it a situation that puts your character at a major disadvantage? Again, roll 2 dice, take the worst result. And are you in a situation where you have an advantage but you also have a disadvantage? Well, now you're just back to that straight single dice roll you would normally have. It is very simple to explain, it is very simple to use, it is incredibly easy to implement inside of D&D 5e, and for that reason alone, it is a really good mechanic. What causes me problems with D&D 5e is they use the mechanic so much that it strips the mechanic of its impact and its flavor, and it ultimately becomes a detriment to my enjoyment of the game. When I was thinking about this video, I did a quick Google search on ways to get advantage and disadvantage in D&D 5e, and literally the first result that popped up in my newsfeed was a Reddit thread that contained 60 different ways or 60 different situations that the advantage-disadvantage mechanic covers inside of the game. And they even say in that thread that it's not an exhaustive list, it's just a sampling of known rules that apply advantage or disadvantage. D&D 5e uses advantage and disadvantage for, to be honest, almost everything, and it has some negative impacts on the game. The first disadvantage, yeah, I just realized the pun of this particular section. The first disadvantage of this system in D&D 5e is advantage, disadvantage slows down D&D 5e games badly. I remember when D&D 5e first came out and a lot of people were transitioning from Pathfinder 1st Edition over to D&D 5e, I would hear an argument all the time, D&D 5e is so much easier to play and it plays so much faster. I know this is going to be controversial, and I know that there are going to be some people who are going to get really mad at me for saying this. I've played a lot of D&D 5e. It's not true. D&D 5e does not play faster than Pathfinder 1st Edition. Okay, let me give you some points of comparison so you can know what I'm talking about here. I ran Pathfinder 1st Edition from the beta playtest of Pathfinder 1e all the way to the very end of the system. I was a very experienced storyteller, and I can tell you in most Pathfinder 1st Edition gaming sessions, unless you were just playing for a really long time, the typical gaming session would have one fight scene. And if the fight scenes were relatively simple, maybe 2 fight scenes. Pathfinder 1e was notorious for being a very crunchy game, and all of that crunch added up to the point where, you know, if you wanted to do fight scenes in that game, it took a little bit of time because there were just so many different mechanical things going on that you just didn't have time to run multiple fight scenes. Over the course of a decade of Pathfinder 1st Edition play, there were very few games where I ran more than 2 fights in a single session. And having played a reasonable amount of D&D 5e, how many fight scenes occur in your typical D&D 5e game? Almost always 1. Occasionally, if the fight scenes are reasonably simple, 2. Almost never will you see 3 or more fight scenes unless the game is running much longer than normal. And by the way, if you want a point of comparison for this, I would encourage you to go watch some Critical Role. I love Critical Role. I think that they are fantastic storytellers. And just so we're clear, they are literally professional D&D players. How many fight scenes do they typically have in one of their shows? Now granted, they do focus on role-playing more, but if there is a fight scene in one of their games, it's usually 1 fight scene. Occasionally, you'll get 2 fight scenes. I watched all of Campaign 2 for Critical Role, and now granted I'm going off memory here, but I'm pretty sure I only remember 1 episode where they had 3 different fight scenes. For reference, it was the Laughing Hand dungeon. I'm pretty sure that's where that happened. But over the course of 3 years of watching Critical Role, their pace of play for a game was almost identical to the pace of play that I remember from running a decade's worth of Pathfinder 1st Edition. D&D 5e doesn't play as fast as people think it plays, and the reason is you're rolling twice as many dice as you need to, way too often. I have played a number of different role-playing games, and if you have ever played a game like Shadowrun or basically anything by White Wolf, you know that the more dice you have to roll in a fight scene, the longer that fight takes. And Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, by relying so heavily on advantage and disadvantage as a mechanic, they create a situation where you end up rolling twice as many dice as you need to roll in order to do a single action. And yes, I realize for a single action, the amount of time that you're eating up is not that much, but over the course of play, when you rely on that mechanic so often, it does add up. I've been running Pathfinder 2e for about 2 years now, and in the last 2 years, I've actually run 5 different sessions where I had 3 combat encounters inside of the same game, and they fit cleanly inside of my normal time to play. Pathfinder 2e actually created a faster game, and it's not the point of this video here, so I'm not going to chase that rabbit, but the design choices that you have to make to speed up gameplay are not the design choices that Wizards of the Coast made with D&D 5e. Now, before I leave this point, there is one last thing I want to say on this subject. 1 fight scene, a game session, or per episode of Critical Role, or however you want to look at it, 1 fight scene per session is not automatically bad. Again, I love Critical Role. They have proven many times that you can have fantastic game sessions with no combat whatsoever. It's not like a game is automatically better if you're just throwing combat after combat after combat. The number of fights is not the sole determining factor in how good a game is, but I hope you see that the point I'm trying to make is the design choice of the advantage-disadvantage system slows down D&D 5e games in a way that limits certain types of gaming, occasionally to the detriment of the system. The next disadvantage of this system in D&D 5e is the, and I'm not sure the right terminology to use here, so I'm just going to say, is the dulling of the flavor of the game. You don't have to have mechanics to have a good story. I've already established this point. But well-designed mechanics can actually enhance the flavor of the game that you're playing. To use a grossly oversimplified comparison, it's easier to create a story out of chess than it is to create a story out of checkers, largely because one of them has more mechanical depth to it. Again, grossly oversimplified, but the point is this: while mechanics are not necessary for a story, mechanics can enhance the story. And in the case of D&D 5e, because advantage and disadvantage covers so many different situations inside of the game, it actually runs counter to the flavor in many different instances. Why is it that attacking a prone opponent and benefiting from certain divine magic has the same mechanical impact on the game? It's a little bit weird. And honestly, it's one of those things that kind of brings me out of the story. In D&D 5e, getting advantage is a very powerful thing, and imposing disadvantage is a very powerful thing, and players will naturally search for ways to do that, but at the end of the day, you can create dramatically different situations that have the exact same mechanical implication, which ultimately dulls the flavor of these different story elements that you're trying to use. If you want a comparison, Pathfinder 2nd Edition actually has a similar mechanic to advantage disadvantage, but that mechanic is called fortune and misfortune, which comes with very clear flavor inside of the game. I can explain fortune and misfortune to you almost as quickly as I can advantage and disadvantage, but in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, if I say that something has the fortune trait, I am not only telling you to roll multiple dice, I'm also telling you that your character is benefiting from positive or good luck. There is a distinct flavor element to that mechanic, and I like that a lot better. Mechanical variety can represent different elements of the story in different ways, and it actually enhances the depth of gameplay for me because I don't feel like these dramatically different situations look the exact same when I go to roll my dice. By the way, this actually goes a little bit deeper with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Fortune and misfortune in Pathfinder 2e is not just roll 2 dice, take the best, or roll 2 dice, take the worst. Fortune and misfortune can cover any kind of luck effect that changes the number of a dice roll. So, for example, if you have the high-level monk feat that lets you automatically roll at least a 10 on your attack roll, that's a fortune effect. So Pathfinder 2e didn't just create more flavor by saying fortune, misfortune, that equals luck in our world, but they actually found multiple ways to portray the concept of luck in their game world. Compare that to the Reddit list that I saw of 60 different things that give you this generic advantage, disadvantage in D&D 5e, and I have to say that it kind of hurts the system overall for me. While I do believe advantage and disadvantage is beneficial because it is very easy to explain and implement, because it is used so much and covers so many different situations, it actually hurts the flavor of the game for me. That brings me to what is ultimately the last point on why I didn't invest in D&D 5e. Remember earlier I told you that story about D20 Simple? The game where you could literally write your characters on the front of an index card? With the exception of spellcasting, my D20 Simple and Wizards of the Coast's rough draft of D&D 5e were so similar that I could almost create a conspiracy theory that Wizards of the Coast had my house bugged. The games were very, very similar to one another. That experience I had rolling some dice and using index cards back in that storm was honestly so close to what I saw with D&D 5e that I remember thinking, I don't need this game. I already have it. That's actually what caused me to decide not to invest in D&D 5e. It wasn't that I thought the game was bad. From the story I told you earlier, D&D 5e is structured in a way that I know can lead to fantastic storytelling. It's just I could recreate the experience so easily that ultimately I didn't see the need to put money into it. Wizards of the Coast created a good product, and I'll say this, if I was brand new to role-playing today, D&D 5e would be a fantastic place to start. By the way, Pathfinder 2e is a fantastic place to start as well. I'm still on that train. But, if I was starting out as a role player today, D&D 5e is great, and I could definitely see why a new player would want to start there. But just for me, it didn't bring enough to the table to warrant me investing in the game. Do I play it? Yes. Do I enjoy playing it? Definitely. But do I feel like I want to put money into something I can recreate for less than $5 from Walmart supplies? No, not really. Ultimately, Wizards of the Coast created a game design that was so simple and compact that it just didn't deliver enough to make me want to invest in the game. But those are my thoughts on D&D 5e and ultimately why I decided not to invest in the system. However, it's time to turn the conversation over to you. Have you invested in D&D 5e? What do you think about advantage and disadvantage? Do you feel like it hurts the game or the flavor of the stories that are told? Do you feel like it enhances the game and makes it more accessible to players? Or are both things true as I have argued today? Let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. We've hit 1,000 subscribers and I am blown away by the wonderful community we have here. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation and have a wonderful day.